The war had been raging for 17 cycles, and the Kuldrith Empire was winning. Commander Zelfrus stood on the observation deck of the orbital fortress, watching another barrage of plasma fire rain down on the VRYNN defensive positions below. The planet of Kasara 7 had once been a thriving colony world, home to 6 billion VRYNN citizens. Now it was a battlefield, its cities reduced to rubble, its forests burned to ash. The VRYNN Confederation was losing ground every day, pushed back system after system by the relentless Kuldrith war machine. Zelfrus was a veteran of 40 campaigns. He had seen species rise and fall, watched empires crumble under the weight of conquest. The Kuldrith were different, though. They didn't just defeat their enemies, they erased them. Every world they conquered was stripped of resources, its population either enslaved or eliminated. The VRYNN were next in line for extinction, and everyone knew it. Commander, we're receiving an emergency transmission from High Command, his communications officer announced, her voice tight with stress. Zelfrus turned away from the viewport. Put it through. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the weathered face of Admiral Corthan, the supreme commander of VRYNN forces. The admiral looked exhausted, his scales dull and cracked from stress. Behind him, Zelfrus could see the chaos of the command center, officers shouting orders, alarms blaring, tactical displays showing nothing but red warning indicators. Commander Zelfrus, we're evacuating the 7th Fleet from the Kasara system, Corthan said without preamble. The Kuldrith have brought in reinforcements. 3 battle carriers and over 500 support vessels. We can't hold the line any longer. Zelfrus felt his heart sink. The 7th Fleet was one of the largest remaining military forces in VRYNN space. If they were retreating, the war was essentially over. What are our orders, sir? Fall back to the Rundell system. We're consolidating all remaining forces for a final defensive stand. If Rundell falls, the Kuldrith will have a clear path to our homeworld. The admiral paused, and, for a moment, Zelfrus saw something he had never seen before in his commander's eyes: fear. This may be our last battle, Zelfrus. Make your peace with whatever gods you believe in. The transmission ended, leaving Zelfrus staring at empty air. Around him, the bridge crew sat in stunned silence. They had all known the war was going poorly, but hearing it stated so bluntly made it real in a way that tactical reports never could. Begin evacuation procedures, Zelfrus ordered, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. All personnel to their stations. We moved to Rundell within the hour. The fortress erupted into controlled chaos as thousands of soldiers and support staff began preparing for departure. Zelfrus moved through the corridors, watching VRYNN warriors gathering their equipment, saying quiet farewells to friends they might never see again. These were good soldiers, brave and disciplined. They deserved better than to die in a hopeless last stand. In the hangar bay, Zelfrus found his second-in-command, Lieutenant Vera, overseeing the loading of supply shuttles. The young officer saluted as Zelfrus approached, but her usual enthusiasm was dimmed. Lieutenant, have all combat vessels been accounted for? Yes, Commander. All ships are being prepped for jump. We should be ready ahead of schedule. Vera hesitated, her claws tapping nervously against her datapad. Sir, is it true? Are we really abandoning Kasara? Zelfrus looked out at the rows of fighters and transports being fueled and armed. We're not abandoning it, Lieutenant. We're making a tactical withdrawal. There's a difference. With respect, Commander, it doesn't feel different to the civilians we're leaving behind. She was right, of course. Millions of VRYNN citizens remained on Kasara 7, unable to evacuate before the Kuldrith arrived. They would face slavery or death, and there was nothing the military could do to stop it. The thought made Zelfrus's blood burn with helpless rage. I know, he said quietly. But if we stay here, we die, and the Kuldrith move on to the next world. At least at Rundell we might have a chance to stop them. Vera nodded, though she didn't look convinced. None of them were. The evacuation proceeded smoothly, and, within the hour, the 7th Fleet was assembled in high orbit above Kasara 7. Zelfrus stood on the bridge of the flagship Resolute Dawn, watching the planet recede on the viewscreen. He could see the flashes of orbital bombardment lighting up the night side, could imagine the terror of the people below as Kuldrith forces swept through their cities. "All vessels report ready for jump, Commander," the navigation officer reported. Zelfrus opened his mouth to give the order, but, before he could speak, every alarm on the bridge began screaming at once. The viewscreen erupted with warning indicators, and the ship's defensive systems activated automatically. "Unknown vessel emerging from hyperspace," the sensor officer shouted. "Wait, multiple vessels. Hundreds of them." Zelfrus's combat instincts took over. "Battle stations. Identify those ships immediately. If it's the Kuldrith, prepare to engage." The tactical display lit up with contact markers, but something was wrong. The ships weren't displaying Kuldrith signatures. In fact, they weren't displaying any known signatures at all. The computer systems were showing nothing but error messages, unable to classify the vessels. "I've never seen designs like these," the sensor officer said, his voice filled with confusion. "They're not Kuldrith, not VRYNN, not any species in our database. The power readings they can't be right. No ship that size should be able to generate that much energy." Zelfrus stared at the display. The unknown vessels had formed up in a precise military formation between the VRYNN fleet and the planet below. There were fighters, cruisers, massive capital ships bristling with weapons easily matching the size of the entire 7th Fleet. Where had they come from? Who were they? "Sir, we're being hailed," the communications officer announced. "Audio only. Should I put it through?" "Do it." Static filled the bridge, then cleared. A voice spoke, and Zelfrus felt the scales on his spine rise in instinctive alarm. The voice was strange, alien in a way he couldn't quite define. It had an odd rhythm to it, a cadence that suggested the speaker was translating from another language in real time. "VRYNN vessels, this is Captain Sarah Chin of the Terran Defense Fleet, representing the United Nations Space Command. We have been monitoring your conflict with the Kuldrith Empire. We are here to help." Terran. The word meant nothing to Zelfrus. He had never heard of such a species. "Unknown vessel, this is Commander Zelfrus of the VRYNN Confederation. We appreciate your offer, but this is a military conflict zone. For your own safety, I recommend you withdraw immediately. The Kuldrith Empire is not an enemy to be taken lightly." There was a pause, and Zelfrus could have sworn he heard laughter in the background of the transmission. When the human Chin spoke again, there was an edge of amusement in her voice. "Commander, with all due respect, we're aware of the Kuldrith. We've been watching them for quite some time. That's why we're here." Another pause. "Tell me, Commander, have you ever heard the old VRYNN legends about the Ghost Warriors? The ancient stories about a species that vanished from the galaxy thousands of years ago, but was prophesied to return when the darkness grew too great?" Zelfrus felt a chill run through him. Everyone knew those stories. They were children's tales, myths told to comfort frightened younglings during the long night. The Ghost Warriors were supposed to be invincible protectors who would appear in times of desperate need, wielding weapons of impossible power. They were fiction, the stuff of fantasy and wishful thinking. "Those are just legends," Zelfrus said slowly. "Are they?" Chen's voice was calm, almost casual. "Commander, my species has been gone from galactic affairs for a very long time. We left this part of space to develop on its own, to see what would emerge. We've been watching from the shadows, learning, growing. But we always knew we'd come back if we were needed." The human paused, and, when she spoke again, her voice was hard as steel. "The Kuldrith have made themselves our problem. We're here to end this war." Before Zelfrus could respond, the tactical display exploded with activity. More ships were emerging from hyperspace, not hundreds now, but thousands. The Terran fleet was enormous, dwarfing anything Zelfrus had ever seen. And they weren't stopping. Ship after ship materialized in perfect formation, their weapons already charging, their shields already active. On the planet below, the Kuldrith forces had apparently noticed the new arrivals. Zelfrus watched on the tactical display as Kuldrith battle groups began redeploying, moving to intercept what they clearly saw as a new threat. The Kuldrith were ruthless and brutal, but they weren't stupid. They recognized a military force when they saw one. "Sir, the Kuldrith are launching fighters," the sensor officer reported. "Looks like they're planning to engage the Terrans." Zelfrus wanted to warn the humans, wanted to tell them to retreat before it was too late. The Kuldrith military was the most powerful force in known space. Their weapons could crack planets, their shields could withstand sustained bombardment from entire fleets. Whatever these Terrans thought they could do, they were about to learn a hard lesson about the realities of modern warfare. But then, the first Terran ships opened fire, and Zelfrus understood why the legends called them Ghost Warriors. The weapons were like nothing he had ever seen. Beams of coherent light that punched through Kuldrith shields like they weren't even there. Kinetic projectiles that moved at appreciable fractions of light speed, hitting with the force of small nuclear weapons. Missile swarms that dodged and weaved through point defense systems with impossible precision. The Kuldrith fighters that had launched so confidently were simply erased, vaporized before they could even return fire. The bridge of the Resolute Dawn fell silent as everyone watched the display. In less than 30 seconds, the Terrans had destroyed over 200 Kuldrith vessels without taking a single casualty. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution. "Impossible," Vera whispered beside Zelfrus. "Those ships shouldn't even exist." The energy output alone, she was cut off as Captain Chen's voice came over the comm again. "Commander Zelfrus, we're going to clear the Kuldrith forces from Kasara 7 and establish a defensive perimeter. I'd recommend your fleet stay out of the combat zone for now. We'll talk more once we're done here." A slight pause. "This won't take long." The Terran fleet descended on the Kuldrith positions like predators on prey. Zelfrus watched in amazement as the humans coordinated their attack with mechanical precision. Every ship knew exactly where to be, exactly when to fire. There was no wasted movement, no hesitation. They moved like they had fought together for centuries, like this was just another routine training exercise rather than a desperate battle against a genocidal empire. The Kuldrith, to their credit, fought back fiercely. Their battle carriers launched everything they had, filling space with fighters and drones. Their capital ships fired broadside after broadside, enough firepower to level continents. For a moment, it looked like the Terrans might be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Then, the human capital ships activated their main weapons. Zelfrus didn't have words for what he saw. Beams of energy, no, not energy, something else, something his sensors couldn't classify, stabbed out from the largest Terran vessels. Where they touched the Kuldrith carriers, matter simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris field. The massive ships just disappeared, erased from reality as if they had never been there at all. "By the ancestors," someone on the bridge breathed. The Kuldrith fleet broke. Zelfrus had never seen it happen before, had never imagined it was possible. The Kuldrith didn't retreat, didn't surrender. They fought to the last warrior, no matter the odds. But, now, faced with an enemy they couldn't even hurt, their formation dissolved into chaos. Ships began jumping to hyperspace without orders, fleeing in every direction. The Terrans let most of them go, only destroying the vessels that tried to target civilian areas on the planet below. Within 10 minutes, it was over. The Kuldrith forces that had been besieging Kasara 7 for months were gone, scattered or destroyed. The Terran fleet held position in orbit, their weapons still charged, their shields still active. They looked completely untouched by the battle. Captain Chen's voice came over the comm one more time. "Commander Zelfrus, Kasara 7 is secure. We're deploying humanitarian aid to the surface and establishing medical facilities for civilian casualties. We'd like to arrange a meeting to discuss the broader strategic situation. I think it's time the VRYNN Confederation learned what humanity can do." Zelfrus found his voice with difficulty. "Captain Chen, who are you people? Where did you come from?" There was warmth in Chen's laugh this time. "We're from a little planet called Earth, Commander. And we've been waiting a long time to come back to the stars. Now, let's talk about how we're going to end this war." As Zelthrus gave orders to prepare a diplomatic shuttle, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just changed. The VRYNN had been fighting a losing war against an unstoppable enemy. They had been preparing to make their final stand, to die with whatever honor they could salvage from defeat. But, now, impossibly, there was hope. The ghost warriors of legend had returned, and they had brought with them weapons and technology that made the mighty Kuldrith Empire look primitive by comparison. Zelthrus didn't know what humanity wanted, didn't know what price they would demand for their help. But, as he watched Terran medical ships descending to the surface of Kasara 7 to aid the wounded civilians, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like they might actually survive this. The diplomatic shuttle descended through the Terran fleet, and Zelthrus couldn't help but study every vessel they passed. Up close, the human ships were even more intimidating. Their hulls were covered in what looked like adaptive armor, plating that shifted and reconfigured itself in response to damage. Their weapon arrays were numerous and varied, suggesting the humans had developed multiple approaches to warfare rather than relying on a single technology. Most disturbing of all was the complete absence of heat signatures. Somehow, the Terrans were running all of these systems without generating the waste heat that should have made them light up on every sensor in the sector. Lieutenant Vera sat beside him in the shuttle, her eyes wide as she recorded everything with her tactical scanner. "Commander, these power readings still don't make sense. Each of those cruisers is generating more energy than our entire fortress installation. How is that even possible?" "I don't know, Lieutenant," Zelthrus admitted. "But I think we're about to find out." The shuttle bay of the Terran flagship was enormous, easily large enough to hold 50 VRYNN cruisers. As they touched down, Zelthrus noticed that the bay was mostly empty except for a few sleek fighters and some cargo vessels. The humans apparently had space to spare. The shuttle door opened, and Zelthrus got his first look at actual humans. They were smaller than he expected, bipedal creatures with smooth skin and surprisingly expressive faces. The honor guard that met them wore armor that seemed to be made of the same adaptive material as the ship's hull, and they carried weapons that hummed with barely contained power. But what struck Zelthrus most was their eyes. Human eyes were forward-facing, predator eyes, and they watched everything with an intensity that made his scales itch. A human female stepped forward and removed her helmet. She had dark hair tied back in a practical style and eyes that seemed to take in every detail of Zelthrus and his escort in a single glance. "Commander Zelthrus, I'm Captain Sarah Chen. Welcome aboard the UNSC Indomitable. If you'll follow me, Admiral Rodriguez is waiting to meet with you." Chen led them through corridors that somehow managed to be both utilitarian and elegant. The walls displayed star maps and tactical information, updating in real time. Crew members moved with purpose, saluting Chen as she passed. Everything spoke of a military culture that valued discipline and efficiency. They entered a conference room where a grizzled human male in an officer's uniform stood studying a holographic display of the entire sector. He turned as they entered, and Zelthrus found himself unconsciously straightening his posture. This human radiated command presence in a way that transcended species. "Commander Zelthrus, Lieutenant Vara, please sit," the Admiral said, gesturing to chairs that had been specially configured for VRYNN physiology. "I'm Admiral Marcus Rodriguez, Commander of the Terran Expeditionary Fleet. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." Zelthrus settled into the chair carefully. "Admiral, I think I should be thanking you. You just saved millions of lives on Kasara 7. But, I have to admit, I'm confused. No one in the VRYNN Confederation has ever heard of humanity. Where exactly do you come from?" Rodriguez smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's a fair question, and one that deserves a complete answer. Captain Chen, if you would?" Chen activated the conference room's holographic display, and a three-dimensional map of the galaxy appeared. A small region in one of the spiral arms lit up in blue. "This is human space as it existed 12,000 years ago. We controlled approximately 40 systems in this sector, had a population of over 200 billion, and had developed faster than light travel about 1,000 years before that point." Zelthrus stared at the map. 12,000 years ago? That was before the VRYNN Confederation even existed, before most of the current galactic powers had even developed spaceflight. What happened? Why did you leave? We didn't leave, exactly, Rodriguez said. We went quiet. You see, about 12,000 years ago, we encountered our first hostile alien species. The war was brutal and lasted 3 generations. We won, but it taught us an important lesson. The galaxy was more dangerous than we had anticipated, and we were unprepared for what was out there. Chen manipulated the display, and the blue region of human space began to dim. We made a decision. Humanity would withdraw from galactic affairs, would stop expanding, stop making contact with other species. We devoted all of our resources to 2 goals: developing defensive technologies that would keep Earth safe, and watching the galaxy to see how other civilizations developed. You've been spying on us for 12,000 years? Vera asked, her voice a mix of awe and indignation. Observing, Rodriguez corrected gently. We wanted to see if peaceful coexistence was possible, if species could develop without becoming existential threats to each other. For a long time, it looked promising. The VRYNN Confederation, the Hessen Alliance, the Torque Federation, all of you managed to find ways to cooperate despite your differences. The galaxy seemed to be becoming a more civilized place. And then, the Kuldrith appeared, Zelthrus said quietly. Rodriguez nodded, his expression grim. And then, the Kuldrith appeared. We watched them conquer system after system, saw how they treated the species they defeated. We debated for years about whether to intervene. Some argued that galactic species needed to solve their own problems, that humanity shouldn't play God. Others said we had a moral obligation to stop genocide when we saw it happening. So what changed? Why are you here now? Zelthrus asked. The Admiral leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. Because the Kuldrith made a mistake. 3 months ago, one of their scout ships discovered a human monitoring station on the edge of our territory. They destroyed it, killed everyone aboard, and then they started scanning our space, mapping our defenses. They were planning to attack Earth, Commander. They saw us as their next target after they finished with the VRYNN. Zelthrus felt ice in his veins. The Kuldrith had attacked humanity? I'm sorry, Admiral. How many casualties did you take? That monitoring station had a crew of 47, Rodriguez said quietly. And every single one of them mattered. So we held a vote, the first truly global vote in human history. Should we continue to hide and watch, or should we act? 87% of humanity voted to intervene. Not for revenge, not for conquest, but because we had the power to stop the Kuldrith and we chose to use it. Chen brought up a new display, this one showing fleet deployments. This expeditionary force represents about 20% of our total military capability. We have 5,000 ships here, with more on the way if we need them. Our orders are simple: neutralize the Kuldrith Empire as a military threat and establish diplomatic relations with peaceful species in the sector. Vera was making calculations on her datapad. 20%? You're saying you have 25,000 warships? Give or take, Chen said with a slight smile. We've had 12,000 years to prepare, Lieutenant. We've been busy. Zelthrus tried to process this information. 25,000 ships, each more powerful than anything in the known galaxy. It was staggering. The VRYNN Confederation's entire military consisted of maybe 800 vessels, and most of those were outdated. What is it you want from us, Admiral? What's the price for your help? Rodriguez looked genuinely surprised by the question. Price? Commander, we're not asking for payment. We're offering an alliance. The VRYNN Confederation impressed us with how long you held out against the Kuldrith despite being outmatched. You evacuated civilian populations, followed rules of engagement even when your enemy didn't, refused to compromise your principles even when it cost you tactically. Those are the values humanity respects. An alliance, Zelthrus repeated slowly. What would that entail? Intelligence sharing, coordinated military operations, joint humanitarian efforts. We help you rebuild your military and your damaged worlds. In exchange, you help us understand the current political situation in the galaxy and introduce us to other species. We've been gone a long time, Commander. We need guides who know how things work now. It sounded too good to be true, and Zelfrus had been a soldier long enough to be suspicious of anything that sounded too good to be true. And if we refuse? Then, we'll still defeat the Cauldroth, Rodriguez said simply. But we'd prefer to do it with you rather than without you. The VRYNN military has experience fighting the Cauldroth, knows their tactics and strategies. That knowledge is valuable. Plus, frankly, we'd like to have allies rather than just observers. Humanity learned a long time ago that you can't face the universe alone. Before Zelfrus could respond, an alarm sounded. Chen immediately pulled up a tactical display on her wrist computer. Sir, we're detecting a Cauldroth fleet inbound. Big one, looks like over 1,000 vessels. They're heading straight for this system. Rodriguez stood, his expression calm. Time to intercept? 20 minutes at current speed. The Admiral looked at Zelfrus. Commander, I'm going to have to cut this meeting short. But, I want you to stay aboard and observe our command center during the engagement. I think it'll help answer some of your questions better than any briefing could. Zelfrus and Vera followed the humans to the ship's bridge, a massive chamber filled with holographic displays and crew stations. As they entered, hundreds of human officers were already at their posts, moving with practiced efficiency. There was no panic, no fear. Just professional soldiers preparing to do their jobs. Status report, Rodriguez called out as he took his command chair. Cauldroth fleet composition is confirmed, a young human male reported. 3 dreadnoughts, 47 battle carriers, 230 cruisers, and the rest are frigates and destroyers. They're broadcasting on all channels, demanding we withdraw from VRYNN space immediately. Chen had moved to a tactical station. Our fleet is in position. All weapon systems are charged and ready. We have firing solutions on every enemy vessel. Rodriguez studied the tactical display thoughtfully. Zelfrus watched him, trying to understand the humans' thinking. 1,000 Cauldroth ships was an overwhelming force, easily enough to destroy entire systems. The humans had superior technology, but they were still outnumbered 2-1. Surely the Admiral would maneuver for advantage, try to split the Cauldroth fleet, use some clever tactic to even the odds. Open a channel to the Cauldroth fleet, Rodriguez ordered. The view screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of a Cauldroth dreadnought. The Cauldroth commander was a massive creature, easily twice the size of a VRYNN, with thick armor plating and eyes that glowed with fanatical fervor. Zelfrus recognized the insignia. This was War Master Krothek, one of the most brutal commanders in the Cauldroth military. Unknown vessels, you have interfered in Cauldroth territory and destroyed Cauldroth property, Krothek growled. You will surrender your ships immediately or be destroyed. The Cauldroth Empire does not tolerate defiance. Rodriguez smiled, and Zelfrus saw something predatory in that expression, something that reminded him that humans were descended from hunters. War Master Krothek, I'm Admiral Marcus Rodriguez of the Terran Defense Fleet. We are here to inform you that your war against the VRYNN Confederation is over. Withdraw your forces from VRYNN space immediately, release all prisoners, and return all seized resources. Do this, and we'll allow you to leave peacefully. Krothek's eyes widened in what might have been surprise, then narrowed in rage. You dare threaten the Cauldroth Empire? We have conquered 100 species. We have burned 1,000 worlds. What is one more insignificant race? The War Master leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. We will crush you, take your worlds, enslave your people. You have made a grave mistake revealing yourselves to us. I don't think so, Rodriguez said calmly. Captain Chen, please demonstrate the consequences of refusing our terms. Target the 3 dreadnoughts only. No other vessels are to be fired upon unless they engage us first. Chen's fingers moved across her console. Targeting solutions locked. Firing MAC rounds. On the tactical display, Zelfrus saw 3 markers separate from the human fleet, accelerating to incredible speeds. They moved too fast for the Cauldron sensors to track, too fast for point defense systems to target. Each round was just a slug of metal, but, moving at 40% of light speed, they carried kinetic energy that made nuclear weapons look like firecrackers. The 3 Cauldron dreadnoughts simply exploded. There was no struggle, no damage control, no desperate final moments. One instant they existed, the next they were expanding clouds of debris and superheated plasma. The entire engagement lasted less than 3 seconds. Krothek's expression went through several rapid changes: shock, disbelief, fear, and, finally, rage. You will pay for that. All ships, attack formation. Destroy these. Rodriguez cut the transmission. Any Cauldron vessel that charges weapons or approaches within combat range is to be disabled immediately. Non-lethal shots when possible. Let's give them a chance to make the smart choice. What followed wasn't so much a battle as a demonstration. The Cauldron fleet attacked in waves, their ships moving with the coordinated fury of a military machine that had crushed countless opponents. But, the humans simply waited until each vessel came within range, then, fired precision shots that disabled engines and weapons systems without destroying the ships. It was surgical, almost casual, as if the humans were swatting away annoying insects rather than fighting for their lives. Zelfrus watched in amazement as human point defense systems tracked and destroyed every missile, every fighter, every drone the Cauldron launched. Human shields shrugged off plasma fire that would have melted through VRYNN armor. Human weapons fired again and again without overheating or running out of ammunition. It was a level of technological superiority that shouldn't have been possible. After 15 minutes, the Cauldron fleet simply stopped attacking. Over 400 of their vessels were drifting hulks, their crews alive but helpless. The rest hung in space, weapons powered down, apparently unable to process what had just happened. Rodriguez opened another channel. This time, a different Cauldron appeared on screen, an older officer who looked far more measured than Krothek. Human Commander, I am Fleet Admiral Dorthex. War Master Krothek has been relieved of command. We request terms for our withdrawal. Release all VRYNN prisoners and return all looted resources, Rodriguez said. Withdraw all forces from VRYNN space within 72 hours. A complete list of occupied worlds and military installations will be transmitted to you. Any Cauldron forces that remain after the deadline will be removed by force. Dorthex was silent for a long moment. And if we refuse these terms? Then, we'll enforce them anyway, Rodriguez said. But, a lot more of your people will die. The Cauldron Empire is finished as an expansionist power, Admiral. You can accept that peacefully, or you can make us prove it. Your choice. I will need to consult with the Imperial Command. You have 6 hours. Rodriguez terminated the connection and turned to Chen. Deploy monitoring drones around the Cauldron fleet. If any of them try to leave before we get an answer, disable their hyperdrives. Politely. As the bridge crew went about their tasks, Rodriguez approached Zelfrus. So, Commander. Still have questions about humanity? Zelfrus realized his hands were shaking. Admiral, you just defeated a fleet that would have taken the combined might of 3 different species to stop. You did it without losing a single ship, without even breaking formation. That's not just superior technology, that's complete military dominance. It is, Rodriguez agreed. And that's why we need allies, not subjects. Power like this is dangerous, Commander. It's tempting to use it to force our will on everyone, to become exactly what we're fighting against. We need species like the VRYNN to remind us why we're doing this, to keep us honest. The Admiral's expression softened. We came back to stop bullies, not to become one. Will you help us do that? Zelfrus looked at Vera, saw the hope in her eyes. He thought about the millions of VRYNN citizens who had been saved today, about the worlds that might be liberated, about the possibility of actually winning this war. Then, he thought about his homeworld, his family, everyone who was depending on him to make the right choice. Yes, Admiral, Zelfrus said finally. The VRYNN Confederation will stand with humanity. The war ended 3 weeks later. Commander Zelfrus stood on the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, now part of a joint VRYN and Terran task force, and watched as the last Kuldrith stronghold in VRYN space surrendered. The fortress world of Carthan Prime had once been the staging ground for Kuldrith invasions, a massive military installation that housed over 1 million soldiers and enough weapons to conquer entire systems. Now it was surrounded by human warships, and its commanders were broadcasting their unconditional surrender on all frequencies. It still didn't feel real. 17 years of brutal warfare, millions dead, dozens of worlds devastated, and it was over in less than a month. The Kuldrith Empire, which had seemed unstoppable just weeks ago, had been forced to its knees by a species most people thought was a myth. "Sir, Admiral Rodriguez is requesting a conference," the communications officer announced. "He wants all Allied commanders present for the formal surrender ceremony." Zelfrus nodded. "Prepare my shuttle. Lieutenant Vera, you're with me. I want you to see this." The trip to the Terran flagship had become routine over the past weeks. Zelfrus and his staff had worked closely with the humans, coordinating relief efforts, helping liberate occupied worlds, and providing intelligence about Kuldrith tactics and bases. The partnership had exceeded all expectations. The humans were professional, efficient, and remarkably humble for a species that could have simply conquered everyone. In the conference room, Zelfrus found himself among an unusual gathering. Admiral Rodriguez was there, along with Captain Chen and several other Terran officers. But there were also representatives from other species, a Hessian diplomat named Kroll, a Torque military commander called Vexen, and even a few species Zelfrus didn't recognize. The humans had apparently been making contact with everyone in the sector. "Thank you all for coming," Rodriguez began, gesturing for everyone to take their seats. "Today marks the official end of hostilities between the Allied forces and the Kuldrith Empire. The Kuldrith have agreed to withdraw all military forces from occupied territories, release all prisoners, and pay reparations for damages caused during their campaigns. A formal treaty is being drafted that will limit their military to defensive forces only and establish neutral observers to ensure compliance." Hessian diplomat Kroll, a massive crystalline being whose body chimed softly when he moved, spoke up. "Admiral Rodriguez, while the Hessian Alliance is grateful for humanity's intervention, we must ask the uncomfortable question: what are your intentions now? You have demonstrated military superiority over every known species. What is to stop you from becoming the next Kuldrith Empire?" It was the question everyone had been thinking, and Zelfrus was curious to hear the answer. The room fell silent, all eyes on Rodriguez. The Admiral didn't look offended. If anything, he seemed to have been expecting the question. "That's fair, and I'll give you an honest answer. Humanity learned something important in our first contact war 12,000 years ago: military power alone doesn't create lasting peace. Domination creates resentment, occupation creates resistance, and conquest creates enemies. We could conquer the entire galaxy if we wanted to, but what would that gain us? 1,000 species that hate us, constant rebellions, an empire too large to manage? No thank you." Chen activated a holographic display showing a map of the sector. "Here's what humanity actually wants: peaceful neighbors, open trade, cultural exchange, and collective security. We're proposing the formation of a Galactic Security Council, a voluntary alliance where member species maintain their sovereignty but cooperate on defense, humanitarian aid, and conflict resolution. No species gets special privileges. Decisions are made collectively. Humanity gets one vote, just like everyone else." Torque Commander Vexen, a six-limbed creature covered in bioluminescent scales, studied the proposal carefully. "And if a member species disagrees with the Council's decisions? Then, they're free to leave," Rodriguez said simply. "We're not building an empire. We're building a neighborhood watch. If someone wants to opt out, that's their choice. We'd prefer to have everyone involved, but we won't force it." Zelfrus spoke up. "What about enforcement? If another aggressive species emerges, if someone decides to start conquering their neighbors? Then, the Council responds," Chen said. "Together. Look, we're not naive. We know there will always be conflicts, always be bad actors who need to be stopped. But we believe it should be a collective decision, not one species acting as judge, jury, and executioner. Humanity has the firepower, yes, but we want oversight. We want other species telling us when we're wrong, keeping us honest. Kroll's crystalline body emitted a thoughtful chime. This is unusual. In my species' history, the powerful have always dominated the weak. It is the natural order. Maybe, Rodriguez admitted. But humanity decided a long time ago that we could do better than the natural order. We've fought wars on our own planet over this exact question, whether might makes right, or whether intelligence and cooperation can create something better. We eventually figured out that the second option works better for everyone, including the strong. He paused, looking around the room. Besides, being the galaxy's police force sounds exhausting. We'd much rather have partners than subjects. The room erupted into discussion, various species debating the merits of the proposal. Zelfrus listened carefully, hearing hope mixed with skepticism, interest mixed with fear. Everyone had been burned before, had seen promises of cooperation turn into exploitation. But there was also a palpable sense of relief that someone was finally offering an alternative to endless conflict. After an hour of discussion, Rodriguez called for order. I know this is a lot to process, and we're not asking for immediate decisions. Take this proposal back to your governments, discuss it, debate it. We'll be here when you're ready. In the meantime, we have a surrender to accept. The ceremony took place on Carthan Prime, in the very throne room where Kuldrith warlords had planned their campaigns of conquest. The massive chamber had been stripped of its weapons and banners, leaving only the cold stone walls and the throne itself a brutal thing made of melted armor from defeated enemies. The Kuldrith delegation was led by Empress Valthera herself, the supreme ruler of the Kuldrith Empire. She was ancient by Kuldrith standards, her armor scarred from 100 battles, her eyes still burning with barely contained fury. She approached the surrender table with her head held high, refusing to show weakness even in defeat. Admiral Rodriguez stood opposite her, with Zelfrus and the other allied commanders arranged behind him. The Terran honor guard lined the walls, their weapons at rest but clearly ready if needed. Empress Valthera, Rodriguez said formally. You are here to sign the terms of surrender and accept responsibility for the Kuldrith Empire's actions during this conflict. Do you understand the terms as they have been presented? I understand them, Valthera said, her voice like grinding stones. The Kuldrith Empire will withdraw from all occupied territories. We will release all prisoners. We will pay reparations. We will reduce our military to defensive forces only. We will allow neutral observers to monitor our compliance. She paused, her eyes locked on Rodriguez. You have defeated us, human. But, understand this, the Kuldrith do not forget. We will remember this day. We will remember your face. Good, Rodriguez said calmly. Remember it well. Remember that we could have destroyed you completely, but chose mercy instead. Remember that we could have occupied your worlds, but chose withdrawal instead. Remember that we gave you the chance to change, to become something better than conquerors. The Admiral leaned forward slightly. And, remember that if you ever threaten peaceful species again, we'll come back. And, next time, we won't be so generous. Valthera held his gaze for a long moment, then, slowly reached for the signing stylus. Her hand hesitated over the document, and, for an instant Zelfrus thought she might refuse, might choose destruction over submission. But, then, she signed, her movements sharp and angry. It is done, she said. The Kuldrith Empire surrenders. As the Kuldrith delegation was escorted out, Zelfrus found himself standing beside Rodriguez, watching them go. Do you think they'll honor the treaty? For now, Rodriguez said. They're broken and humiliated. It'll take them generations to rebuild, and, by then, we'll have established enough defensive networks that they won't dare try again. But, will they secretly hate us? Will they teach their children stories about the terrible humans who destroyed their empire? Probably. We can live with that. Over the following weeks, Zelfrus watched as humanity began the enormous task of transitioning from war to peace. Terran medical ships descended on damaged worlds, their advanced technology healing injuries that VRYNN doctors had considered impossible to treat. Terran construction vessels helped rebuild shattered cities, using fabrication systems that could create entire buildings in days. Terran diplomats met with every species in the sector, patiently explaining humanity's goals and listening to concerns. But what impressed Zelthrus most was how the humans treated the Kuldrith themselves. Rather than leaving them to starve or collapse into chaos, Terran humanitarian ships arrived at Kuldrith worlds with food, medicine, and technical assistance. When asked why they would help former enemies, Captain Chen had simply said, "Because hungry, desperate people start wars. We want them stable and recovering, not plotting revenge." 3 months after the surrender, Zelthrus was summoned to Earth. The journey took 2 weeks even with Terran hyperdrives, as humanity's homeworld was located in a distant corner of the galaxy. As his ship approached the solar system, Zelthrus understood why humanity had been so confident in their isolation. The entire system was fortified beyond anything he had ever seen. Defensive platforms surrounded every planet. Automated defense networks covered every approach vector. There were detection grids so sensitive they could track a single fighter across thousands of light-years. But Earth itself was beautiful. Zelthrus stood at the viewport of his shuttle as they descended through the atmosphere, marveling at the blue oceans and green continents. Cities glowed like jewels across the night side, connected by glittering webs of transportation systems. Orbital elevators stretched from the surface to massive space stations above. This was a civilization that had had millennia of peace to develop, to grow, to perfect their technology. The shuttle landed at a facility that Zelthrus was told was called the United Nations headquarters, apparently a place where all of humanity's various political groups met to make collective decisions. He was escorted through gardens and plazas filled with humans of every size, color, and appearance. The diversity was staggering. Humanity apparently had as many variations within their species as there were species in the Galactic Council. He was brought to an enormous chamber where thousands of humans sat in tiered seating arranged in a circle. At the center stood Admiral Rodriguez, now wearing a formal uniform rather than combat gear. As Zelthrus entered, the entire assembly fell silent. "Commander Zelthrus of the VRYNN Confederation," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying through the chamber. "On behalf of the United Nations of Earth and all of humanity, I welcome you to our homeworld. You are the first non-human to stand in this chamber in 12,000 years." Zelthrus felt the weight of history pressing down on him. "Admiral Rodriguez, I am honored by this invitation. But I confess I don't understand why I'm here." Rodriguez smiled. "You're here because the VRYNN Confederation has agreed to join the Galactic Security Council, and you've been appointed as their representative. But, more than that, you're here because you were the first person to trust us. When we appeared in your darkest hour, when you had every reason to be suspicious of our motives, you chose to believe that we meant what we said. That kind of trust deserves recognition." The Admiral gestured to the assembled humans. "This is the Global Parliament, the governing body of Earth. They wanted to meet you, to see the person who helped forge the first alliance between humanity and the wider galaxy. They wanted to say thank you." As one, thousands of humans rose to their feet. The applause started slowly, then built into a thunderous wave of sound that echoed through the chamber. Zelthrus stood frozen, overwhelmed by the gesture. These people, who could have conquered the galaxy, who possessed technology and power beyond imagination, were thanking him. After the ceremony, Rodriguez took Zelthrus on a tour of Earth. They visited rebuilt cities that had been destroyed in ancient wars, saw monuments to the humans who had died fighting for peace, walked through museums displaying the history of humanity's long journey from primitive hunter-gatherers to spacefaring civilization. Everywhere they went, humans stopped to greet Zelthrus, to shake his hand, to express their hope for the future. On his last night on Earth, Zelthrus and Rodriguez stood on a balcony overlooking the ocean, watching the sun set over the water. The sky blazed with colors that Zelthrus had no names for, beautiful and alien. "Why?" Zelthrus asked finally. "Why did humanity really come back? You could have stayed hidden forever, stayed safe. Why risk everything to save species you'd never met?" Rodriguez was quiet for a long time. There's an old human saying, evil triumphs when good people do nothing. We watched the Kuldrith for years, watched them destroy species after species, and every day we didn't act, we were complicit in those deaths. We told ourselves we were just observing, just studying, but the truth was simpler, we were afraid. The Admiral turned to face Zelfrus. Afraid of getting involved, afraid of the responsibility, afraid of making mistakes. But then, we realized something. We had been given a gift, time, resources, technology beyond anything currently in the galaxy. And what were we doing with it? Hiding. Being safe. Protecting ourselves while others suffered. So you decided to be heroes, Zelfrus said. No, Rodriguez said firmly. We decided to be neighbors. Heroes swoop in, solve everything, then leave. Neighbors stick around, help rebuild, share the burden. We don't want to be your saviors, Commander. We want to be your friends. And friends don't let friends get conquered by genocidal empires. Zelfrus looked out at the ocean, at this beautiful world that had birthed such an strange and wonderful species. The VRYNN have a legend about the Ghost Warriors. It says they would return when darkness covered the galaxy, that they would fight not for glory or conquest, but because it was right. I always thought it was just a story. Maybe it was, Rodriguez said. But sometimes stories have a way of making themselves true. Humanity spent 12,000 years preparing to be the civilization our descendants would be proud of. We didn't always succeed, we made mistakes, had setbacks, fought with each other about the right path forward. But we kept trying. And when the moment came, when we had to decide who we wanted to be, we chose to be the people in the story. I'm glad you did, Zelfrus said quietly. When Zelfrus returned to VRYNN space, he found his homeworld in the midst of a renaissance. Liberated populations were returning to their homes. Cities were being rebuilt with a mix of VRYNN and Terran technology. Trade routes were reopening. The war was over, truly over, in a way that felt permanent rather than just a pause before the next fight. At the spaceport, Zelfrus was greeted by Admiral Corthan, who had somehow grown younger in the past months. The stress and fear that had aged him during the war had melted away, replaced by hope and energy. Commander Zelfrus, welcome home, Corthan said warmly. How was Earth? Remarkable, sir. Humanity is, they're unlike anything I expected. They have power that could terrify the galaxy, but they use it to build rather than destroy. Corthan nodded. I've been reading the reports from our diplomatic corps. Apparently, 23 species have now joined the Galactic Security Council. Even some of the neutral powers are interested. The humans have done in months what we couldn't do in centuries, they've united the galaxy against tyranny. They did more than that, Zelfrus said. They gave us hope. They proved that strength doesn't have to corrupt, that power can be used responsibly. They showed us that the legends we tell our children don't have to be fantasies, they can be goals to aspire to. That night, Zelfrus stood on his balcony at home, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Terran fleets were patrolling. Somewhere, human diplomats were meeting with new species. Somewhere, human engineers were helping rebuild shattered worlds. The Ghost Warriors of legend had returned, and they had brought with them the promise of a better future. Zelfrus thought about the war, about the friends he had lost, about the dark days when defeat had seemed certain. Then, he thought about Captain Chen, Admiral Rodriguez, and all the humans who had risked their lives to save species they'd never met. He thought about a civilization that had chosen compassion over conquest, cooperation over domination. The VRYNN had survived. The galaxy had survived. And it was all because a species that everyone thought was just a legend had decided to make that legend real. As he watched the stars, Zelfrus smiled. The future was uncertain, as it always was. There would be new challenges, new conflicts, new problems to solve. But, for the first time in his long military career, Zelfrus felt genuinely optimistic. Humanity had come back to the stars, not as conquerors or tyrants, but as friends and allies. And that, Zelfrus thought, made all the difference.